Silence. The trade deadline has come and passed, and unless there is a shocking revelation that the 49ers got a trade in before 1 p.m. Pacific time, their fans are going to have to settle for only 4 trades. Well, not only, 4 is a lot, but it doesn't seem like a lot when a lot of signs were pointing toward the 49ers making another one before this trade deadline. So what happened? What happened around the league? How do the 49ers move forward? These are the 4 trades that they made here in 2025. Bryce Huff, Sky Moore, Brian Robinson, and Keon White last week. The trade deadline has passed without a 5th move. You guys know my stance on this. The 49ers have ranked number 25 defensively ever since Fred Warner went down against Tampa Bay. And I know that the sample hasn't been huge, but as we've watched the 49ers, it is very clear that they are deficient on that side of the ball. I think it's also clear that this team has fought their asses off to get to 6-3. They might have even taken some in the 49ers building by surprise to be 6-3 at this point. And in order to seriously contend moving forward, and I believe that at 6-3, you always have to have your foot on the gas pedal. I personally believe that the 49ers need to still make additions. Now, some might still be possible after the trade deadline if anybody is released, and sometimes we see releases after the deadline. So I'm looking at potentially somebody like Bradley Chubb of the Miami Dolphins. Those players now have to clear waivers. So the 49ers could still theoretically add some talent without sacrificing any draft compensation. But assuming that no deals came through, the 49ers are in a spot now where they are holding on to all the draft capital for 2026 and 2027. This is what they entered the day with as far as 2026 draft capital, and they're going to be leaving the day with 2026 draft capital that is listed here as well. First round pick, second round pick, third round pick. They're going to have either a 4 or a 5. If Bryce Huff reaches 8 sacks, the 49ers are going to lose the 4th round pick, and it's going to be the 5th round pick instead. That is conditional heading back to Philadelphia. They project to have 3 compensatory selections in the 2026 draft in the 4th round. And then the 7th rounder, this is going to be interesting. If Keon White is not active for 7 games, then a 7th rounder is going to come back to them from the New England Patriots. We also were looking at 2027 draft capital for the 49ers, since that could have been packaged in any potential trade. They still have a relatively full deck in 2027, just no 6th round pick and a 7th round pick instead, because they ran a pick swap with Kansas City for Sky Moore. Obviously, holding on to draft compensation important for the 49ers, especially considering the fact that they've already made trades for 4 players over the course of this season. But especially after Michael Williams went down with the torn ACL on Sunday, I had thought that the 49ers would, and that was coming off of the Yetur Gross-Matos move to injured reserve. I had thought that at least one more might be necessary for San Francisco, but they did not make that move today. Now, several things happened around the league today, and maybe some of them were related to the 49ers' lack of activity. The first one, the Seattle Seahawks traded with the Saints for a receiver, Rashid Shaheed. So the Seahawks spent quite a bit there. They're number 1 in DVOA this season. They've got a really good offense, a really good defense, and the number 1 special teams unit. So the Seahawks are going all in. 3rd and a 4th round pick or 4th and a 5th round pick, 4 and a 5 for Rashid Shaheed, the receiver for the Saints, who made some noise against the 49ers back in week 2. Then came the first of 2 massive splashes today. The Colts traded 2 first-round picks and wide receiver A.D. Mitchell to the Jets for the cornerback Sauce Gardner. And the Cowboys then traded a 2026 2 and a 2027 first-round pick for the Jets for Quinnen Williams. So very clearly the Jets in fire sale mode. And it really appeared that the 49ers might be making a move for Jermaine Johnson, somebody we had mentioned a lot over the course of the past several weeks. A Robert Saleh defensive end tore his Achilles in week 17 of the 2023 season, missed 2024, and showed up in 2025 and is regaining some of his game. I don't think that he is as good of a player as he was ahead of the Achilles tear, but he's only 26 years old. And there were some rumor accounts that said that the Jermaine Johnson deal was coming, not necessarily with the 49ers, but that was one that a lot of people had been linking. Apparently, San Francisco had been calling about Jermaine Johnson. But according to Connor Hughes, who's a Jets reporter, he said that the Jermaine Johnson asking price from New York was a second-round pick. And if that's the case, I could see why the 49ers didn't do it. Maybe they were holding out until the last minute to see if the Jets would drop their asking price to a third-round pick. But for a player coming off of a torn Achilles, and that was the injury in week 17 of the 2023 season, the two probably a little rich, even though Jermaine Johnson was or still is under contract through the 2026 season. Then there's Bradley Chubb of the Miami Dolphins. And this one's really interesting to me because I do wonder if Miami, who was trying to trade Chubb, I do wonder if he's released at some point, because there's obviously a fire sale going on with the Dolphins. They've already fired their GM, Chris Greer. Mike McDaniel is still the coach there, but they did also sell Jalen Phillips to the Philadelphia Eagles for a third-round pick. Bradley Chubb, a little less of a tradable situation because he's older than Jalen Phillips. He's coming off of an ACL tear not too long ago, former Pro Bowler. Bradley Chubb, though, still has a couple years left on his contract after this one. There is nothing in Bradley Chubb's deal that guarantees money in 2026 or 2027. But there still is a sizable amount of money here in 2025 that I don't necessarily think that the Dolphins would be willing to pay. So if they release him after the trade deadline, everybody has to clear waivers. The 49ers are lower down on the waiver claim order because they're 6-3 right now, but there is a chance that somebody like Bradley Chubb still becomes available moving forward. I will say that the Bengals not trading Trey Hendrickson is downright idiotic. And it sounds like the Bengals just would not move off of the first-round price for Trey Hendrickson. But, you know, if you've got something in your fridge that's going to go bad, you've got to throw it out. Like, you can't just let it sit there and hope that somehow that's going to benefit your entire refrigerator. It's not. And the Bengals have one of the worst defenses that we've seen in quite some time. They became open publicly to trading Trey Hendrickson late in this process, but they obviously didn't end up doing it. And the reports were that they wanted a first-round pick for a guy that's already not reached an agreement with them once. And I have a hard time believing he's going to want to reach an agreement with the Bengals when this comes up again over the course of this next offseason, because they weren't willing to pay him market rate the first time, and now he's going to have actual free agency dangling in front of him. Anyway, here's a look at the 49ers roster. This is what they're working with moving forward. I understand they can still make moves off the waiver wire, and that's going to be a constant thing, but they have settled for the 4 trades that they made earlier prior to the deadline. Nothing, it looks like, has come in right ahead of the trade deadline. And I think we need to zoom in on San Francisco's defensive line, because, you know, one of the trades they did make over the course of this 2025 cycle was for Bryce Huff, the defensive end. That probably was the biggest splash that San Francisco made. The trade with the Philadelphia Eagles, either a 4th rounder or a 5th rounder to Philly. Huff is set to return for San Francisco against the Rams this weekend. And that return for Bryce, the 49ers hope, will propel their defense to the levels of play that we saw against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, since Fred Warner got hurt against Tampa Bay in week 6, San Francisco has had the number 25 defense in the NFL. That is not good enough. Like, let's open up the team tier chart here just to position the 49ers to illustrate in the movement here and the strategy moving forward. They right now are a below average defense. Anything on The x-axis, which is moving left to right, is offense. So the further to the right you are, the better your offense is. Anything on the y-axis is defense. Under the horizontal red dividing line means that your defense is below average. As the 49ers have slid defensively, they are now below average there. They're where the Steelers are defensively. They're better than the Ravens, the Commanders, the Giants, the Jets, the Dolphins, but that's not saying much, right? I think if the 49ers are truly going to contend, and I think that, again, you do owe it to the locker room to give that room, which is managed 6-3 despite all of these injuries, you do owe it to the locker room to make as good of a push as possible. That's a cultural thing for the 49ers. The way forward is to move your dot or your logo as far to the right as possible. And we could talk about Brock Purdy. We can talk about Ricky Pearsall, maybe even Brandon Ayuk down the road for that. We could talk about the 49ers improving offensive line now that they made a change at left guard for that. But you also have to stabilize the defense. Like, look at the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are way down here. Their defense is terrible, but their offense has been really good. They made the splash today for Quinnen Williams. They also traded for Logan Wilson. So the Cowboys traded for 2 defensive pieces, desperately trying to bring their logo up so they can be in the average territory defensively. That was the promised move that Jerry Jones talked about yesterday. And then the Cowboys think if they're in this territory where my cursor is, they can contend. That's what Dallas thinks. Maybe they're being overly ambitious after they got their doors kicked in yesterday by the Arizona Cardinals, and they've obviously got a losing record, but that's what Dallas is thinking. The 49ers obviously believe that this offense can take them further to the right, but I just have a tough time seeing the defense stabilizing unless Bryce Huff is this magic cure that the 49ers must think that he is. And the one piece of data that probably gives the 49ers optimism in their building is that since that Warner injury in week 6, they've obviously been bad defensively against Tampa Bay. They were bad defensively against the Houston Texans. I don't think they were very good defensively against the New York Giants, but they were good defensively against the Atlanta Falcons, who are, by the way, a below average offense. But they had Bryce Huff in that game against the Falcons. So I think that the 49ers are saying, well, hey, we made a move for Keon White. We made a move for Clelin Ferrell, even though it wasn't a trade. It was just a signing, but he already had a sack in his first game. I think that the 49ers are looking at this as Huff plus White plus Clelin Ferrell plus the rise of Sam Okuwanu gives them an acceptable defensive end room. I am skeptical just because injuries have already pummeled this team, and there is no guarantee that injuries will not continue pummeling this team. That's why I, as a GM, would have loved to have seen Jermaine Johnson in a 49ers uniform. Bradley Chubb might be a player on the decline, older player now, 29 years old after the ACL tear, but I think that could still give the 49ers more depth. Who knows? Maybe Miami will still release him to avoid some of that money, and the 49ers could pounce on him on the waiver wire, but not likely right at this point. I just think that, when you look at this for San Francisco, they've been skating on thin ice all season. The ice got even thinner, or they just fell all the way through it with the Michael Williams injury the other day. Yet they've somehow managed to stay afloat. And, what they saw from Keon White and from Clelin Ferrell was indeed impressive the other day. I mean, this is Keon White. He was their highest graded pass rusher right after they traded with the New England Patriots for him. So obviously they have added some juice. The thought was that they might still need a little more. The numbers right now, though, to me are clear. The 49ers, again, they're the number 26 pass rush in all football over the course of this whole year, and that includes the games with Bryce Huff and with Nick Bosa. Number 26 pass rush win rate measured by ESPN. They are the number 25 defense since Fred Warner went down, and obviously, since Warner went down, we've only seen one game of Bryce Huff. That was against the Atlanta Falcons. He did play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so that does count. But I'm looking more beyond that when they didn't have Warner at all. And they've not had Yetur Gross-Matos essentially throughout any of that stretch because he got hurt in week 5, and we haven't seen him since, and he was recently placed on IR. So the question then becomes, how many plus edge rushers do you have if you are the San Francisco 49ers moving forward? I think Bryce Huff qualifies as a plus edge rusher. Keon White, the first look at Keon White indicated that he might be one. So maybe you have two, but it's still very iffy there. I know that Sam Okawanu's impressed. He had 5 pressures the other day, but that is still not a truly proven commodity for San Francisco, especially since he's battling through an ankle injury. And I wouldn't say that Clelin Ferrell is a plus edge rusher. He never has been. He might be a good edge setter against the run. He probably fills in for Mykel Williams at that edge setting position. In fact, the 49ers currently have 1 spot open on the 53-man roster after they place Mykel Williams on injured reserve. And when that happens, maybe Clelin Ferrell will take that spot on the 53 and they'll downgrade Robert Beal to the practice squad, because I think that Clelin is obviously one of the 49ers' top 4 defensive ends. So you've got at best 3 plus edge rushers, and that's only if everything goes right from this point forward. Now, the positive of this for the 49ers is what they didn't give up, right? You still maintain that draft capital right here in 2026, which was important for them. You still maintain all of the draft capital in 2027, which was important for them. You can make sure you balance your salary cap situation. You can make sure the team continues getting younger. But when I looked at their 2026 haul, I saw some opportunity through the fact that they have 3 comp picks in the 4th round scheduled to arrive after this season. They have not been awarded yet, so they couldn't trade one of those comp picks today, but they could have operated knowing that those picks are almost certainly coming to them, and they could have traded one of either the 4th or the 5th. We don't know if it's a 4 of the 5. They could have traded the Bryce Huff situation. They have 2 picks right now. They have a 4 and they have a 5, but one of those is going to go to Philadelphia, depending on if Huff reaches 8 sacks. If he reaches 8 sacks, the 4 is going to go to Philadelphia. If he doesn't reach 8 sacks, the 5 is going to go to Philly. You can still trade one of those, or you could have still traded one of those and maybe packaged it in with a 2027 pick for one of these players. Obviously, though, a deal was not reached. There had been several reports, including from very reputable sources like Jay Glazer, who's normally very on top of this stuff. Connor Hughes on the Jets side. Connor Hughes reported that the Jets were talking to the Dallas Cowboys about Quinnen Williams. Quinnen Williams was then traded to the Dallas Cowboys. Connor Hughes also in that same video reported that the 49ers were talking to the Jets about Jermaine Johnson, the edge rusher drafted in that 1st round back when Robert Saleh was the head coach in New York. Williams to the Cowboys happened. Johnson to the 49ers did not. So at some point, we're going to learn the backstory of this stuff, but obviously a move did not come through for the 49ers. Mike is texting me. He says 49ers bottom 5 D-line for the rest of the season. I don't think they're ever on the serious market for a defensive tackle. Let's go back to the roster right now for San Francisco and appraise this defensive line. I think that they're sketchy at defensive tackle when it comes to pass rushing. I mean, Jordan Elliott has played well against the run this year. The 49ers as a team have played well against the run. They're up to number 7 run defense in the NFL this year, which is a huge, huge improvement over last year. So that's good for San Francisco, but the pass rushing has fallen off. And I think that, especially if we move forward to this game against the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday, this might be the best team in football that they're facing, at least the best offense-defense combination that they're facing. And Matthew Stafford, if he is not properly pressured, will be in line to completely shred the 49ers. Then you can ask, well, is there somebody that could have ensured that Matthew Stafford is pressured enough that was available at the trade deadline? And maybe there wasn't. Right? Maybe there wasn't a situation where the 49ers could realistically pick somebody up that could push this pass rush over the top. But I think just for the sake of the remaining games on this schedule, and they've already played 9, so they've got 8 remaining in the season, they're probably still going to need more defensive ends. I don't think it's realistic to expect nobody else to get hurt for this team to be able to just skate on through with Huff, Keon White, Sam Okawanu, Clelin Ferrell, and then Robert Beal Jr. and William Bradley King as your 5 and your 6. And then if, Mike is talking about the 49ers defensive line as a whole being weak, your defensive tackles are Jordan Elliott, the rookie, Alfred Collins. We should probably put the rookie shade on Alfred Collins right there. Kalia Davis, CJ West, who's been a healthy scratch here over the course of the past couple of weeks. It is not a robust 49ers defensive line. They might have had a window of opportunity to make it a little bit better, at least today, but obviously they did not determine that whatever offers were on the table would be worth it, because they were talking with the Bengals about Trey Hendrickson. They were talking with the Jets about Jermaine Johnson, but the Bengals reportedly wanted that one for Trey Hendrickson. The Jets wanted the second rounder for Jermaine Johnson. We're not sure what the price on Bradley Chubb is. Well, it was. I have to put that in the past tense now. And that's interesting to me, because I don't think that Chubb would have fetched all that much. That probably would have been a lower round pick, just given the fact that he's 29. He hadn't been nearly as productive after the ACL. It is a former Pro Bowler. I think there's something to be said about the veteran savvy that Chubb might bring to the table. And that's the one that I'm going to continue to circle back on, for a simple reason that Miami doesn't seem interested in keeping a lot of these guys. And if you go to Bradley Chubb's contract, he's under contract for 2 more seasons after this one. And in 2026 and 2027, it's $19 million and $18 million. Nothing there is guaranteed. The one thing, though, about Bradley Chubb is that his base salary is low this season, $1.255 million, but he's got a high per game roster bonus total of $2.2 million. So there are 8 games left. If you divide 2.2 divided by 8 games, that's $275,000 per game that Bradley Chubb is going to earn from the Dolphins if he remains on the Dolphins for the final 8 games of this season. That is not nothing. Again, it's going to add up to 275,000 times that 8. So the Dolphins might be willing to offload that Bradley Chubb contract if that is a true fire sale and reconstruction in Miami. But after the trade deadline, every single release, even if it is a vested veteran, must pass through waivers. And the 49ers are lower in that waiver order with a 6-3 record at this point. We've got more from Mike. According to multiple reports, the Dolphins received calls about wide receiver Jalen Waddle and edge rusher Bradley Chubb. Miami's asking price, though, was too high. So there you have it. I mean, again, for Chubb, you would inherit 3 years of team control. You probably wouldn't be interested in the prices for 2026 and 2027, but those would not be guaranteed for Bradley Chubb. So you would be able to rework the deal or just cut him without any further loss. The 49ers made it a point whenever Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch talked that they wanted to only make moves for players who were under contract beyond 2025. So Keon White under contract beyond 2025. You can go back to the other 49ers moves made this offseason. Bryce Huff being the most prominent one, under contract beyond 2025. They also have Bryce Huff under contract next year. I look at this as a 3-year window for the 49ers. They did not tear down the foundation of the team despite running a cost reset because of the salary cap this past offseason. So what they did is they took out a lot of the B-listers in the roster construction. Let's open up the roster now so we can have a clear look at this. Unfortunately, the only A-lister remaining on the defensive side of the ball that's healthy right now is Deommodore Lenoir. But every single player is a foundational pillar for this 49ers team is highlighted in yellow. Brock Purdy also would be highlighted in yellow, but he's currently hurt, so he's got the injury shading. But you can see they kept Purdy, McCaffrey, Kittle, Trent Williams, foundational pillars up and down the offense. And on defense, they had Nick Bosa in the D-line room healthy to begin this season. They had Fred Warner at linebacker, Deommodore Lenoir at cornerback. All those players integral to the structure of the 49ers team, but the cost reset happened when they jettisoned players around them. When they started filling the supplementary spots. When you're building a house, you've got all the beams and all the load-bearing walls, those remained. Those became even more highly paid this offseason with all the contracts that the 49ers gave out. But they went for cost efficiency and youth around the yellow load-bearing walls. Well, when you do that, there are two dynamics happening concurrently. One, yes, you're younger at the majority of the positions on the roster. The 49ers said that's a good thing, especially given how bad 2024 went, but they also recognized there would be some growing pains, as we've seen through some of these rookie struggles. And I think that we've seen the positives and the negatives of that. That's really gone along as expected for San Francisco, right? Heavy reliance on the draft class, but there's been good and there's been bad that's come out of that. When you appraise the big picture entering this offseason and then going through this offseason as they built the team this way, you have to look at this in a 3-year window for the 49ers. One window closed because they capped out. They capped out and they got too old. Everything failed in 2024 in large part due to those reasons. Moving forward, you look at 2025, you look at 2026, and you look at 2027 as a potential build for the youth on this roster, all while the second concurrent thing is happening. The veterans are getting older. So I think, by 2027, it's fair to say that guys like Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, maybe all of them will be past their primes. But simultaneously, you'll have the draft classes of 2024, 2025, by then 2026 and 2027, if you have some splash rookies in 2027, maturing into their primes. The goal is to strike the heavenly balance, right? Catch enough of the A-listers, the existing A-listers primes, and combine it with the rising primes of some of the young players. I think 2026 is the 49ers' best possible chance to do that because the 2025 guys will no longer be rookies. 2024 players like Malik Mustafa and Dominic Pooney will be third-year vets. Somebody like Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Trent Williams, you can reasonably expect them to still be playing at a high level. We've seen the high level of play from those guys still here in 2025. And maybe you strike gold with the best roster that you've had in 2026. That doesn't mean that you say, no, we're not going to contend in 2025. It was just less likely that the 49ers would be A-list contenders in 2025. I think that's been very, very obvious with the run-up to the season, the look at how San Francisco was going to approach competition this year, and all of the above. One thing that has made this season more promising for the 49ers is the fact that they're on a last-place schedule. The schedule is definitely easier for the 49ers in 2025 than it probably will be in 2026 and 2027, assuming this build goes correctly. There is a twist, though, in that the Seahawks and the Rams are so damn good this year. They're two of the top 3 teams in football that if the 49ers finish in third place, maybe they'll still have a decently favorable schedule in 2026. But I think that the schedule is probably, in all likelihood, as soft as it will come here in 2025. And that might benefit the 49ers moving forward into this season to still qualify for the playoffs. I do think that without a fifth move, without a way to spruce up a defense that had been ranked number 25. Again, I can't hammer that home enough. A defense that had been ranked number 25 ever since the Fred Warner injury. It's going to be tough sledding for San Francisco to make it through the rest of this schedule and qualify for the playoffs. I mean, if you get elite offensive play, maybe if you're the 49ers, right? Let's go back to here. If you can get elite offensive play, and I know that they have some guns coming back, maybe you can end up over here. And even if your defense is below average, you could be in the mix in this tier, right? If you move over 2 tiers, you're in the same mix as the Seahawks, the Patriots, the Eagles, and you've got a good special teams unit if you're the 49ers. But the defense has been trending downward. And who's to say that downward trend won't continue? Maybe Keon White, maybe Cleveland Farrell stop it. Maybe the 49ers can bounce back up here once Bryce Huff returns. But they're skating on very, very thin ice, which is why I think they were so interested in making a move that would help them in both 2025 and 2026 to satisfy that 3-year window. But Obviously, they did not find the appropriate deal that would satisfy them moving forward. Mike's got some remaining strength of schedule graphics for me, so I'm going to put those up on the screen. You guys can take a look at that XY chart, and we're going to get this up as soon as I find it. Here it is. Here's the remaining strength of schedule. 49ers right in the middle there, number 17, as you can see. Their remaining opponents have a combined winning percentage of .515. It will get easier after the Rams game. The Rams might be the best team in football. I mean, if you want to talk about good teams in the NFL, firm upper right teams, great offense, great defense. The Rams, they may not have a good special teams unit. That might be the 49ers window on Sunday, but they're way up here. We're going to get a very quick look following the 49ers silence at the trade deadline at San Francisco against potentially the best team in this league. The Rams have had a vulnerability on special teams, though, and 49ers fans know well about how damaging something like that can be to a team. The 49ers have actually been the number 3 special teams in the league by EPA ever since they cut Jake Moody. So maybe, I mean, if that's the winning difference against the Rams this time around, again, because it was one of the winning differences when they played the Rams back in week 6. I guess Fred Warner got hurt it was week 5 against the Rams. Warner got hurt in 6 right after that game against the Rams. But if that is the winning difference, then you would not be able to convince me that the NFL is not scripted. Mike has some good thoughts here. He's got players who might return this season for the 49ers. So in essence, some trade acquisitions for San Francisco, given the fact that guys have been out for so long so far this season. Purdy, Pearsall, maybe Brandon Ayuk, Jacob Cowing, Jake Brendel, Ben Barch, Bryce Huff, Yetur Gross-Matos. And I know it's the Yetur Gross-Matos one is so fresh. He's on IR with the hamstring. That was brutal for the 49ers. You know, I thought the double whammy of Gross-Matos and Michael Williams might force the 49ers into another move, because if you just looked at it last week, they made 2 moves last week with Cleveland Farrell and Keon White. And if you get Yetur Gross-Matos back, all of a sudden it's 4 new defensive linemen that you didn't have 2 weeks ago, right? It would have been Huff, YGM, Cleveland Farrell, and Keon White. But the Gross-Matos to IR essentially scuttled the plans. You're not getting 4 out of 4. You might get 3 out of 4 new defensive linemen. And apparently that gave the 49ers enough leverage at this trade deadline to sit back and say, we're not going to overpay for Jermaine Johnson. We're not going to overpay for Bradley Chubb. And, you know, I could tell you for sure, because I talked to several guys about this, they wanted, the players wanted Trey Hendrickson bad. But when the Bengals are out there saying a first-round pick, no, as you saw, nobody willing to pay that for Trey Hendrickson, somebody who's currently hurt, missed some time with the hip injury, who is on an expiring contract. I mean, let's get real. Wrong side of 30, first-round pick for an expiring contract. Maybe the 49ers would have been able to tag him and trade him, but that would have been really risky. The tag price probably would be about $34 to $35 million without cap flexibility for 2025. So just wasn't a feasible thing. Maybe a 2 for Hendrickson. I think the 49ers potentially would have gone there. You know, I was thinking 2 or 3 for Hendrickson. When they come out with a 1, okay, yeah, next, hang up the phone on the Cincinnati Bengals. Jermaine Johnson, after you saw Jalen Phillips go for a 3, you would think Jermaine Johnson, okay, maybe a 3 as well. If the Jets wanted a 2, yeah, I guess the 49ers decided to hang up the phone there. You wonder if the Cowboys trading successfully for Quinnen Williams changed the Jets' attitude on trading Jermaine Johnson, because again, there were some very, very hefty rumors that the 49ers, and not just rumors, like a report from Connor Hughes, who covers the Jets well and covers the Jets closely, that the 49ers were really flirting with trying to add Jermaine Johnson. But it didn't work out. And the 49ers, they will have to rest their laurels on the 4 trades that they did make, which is still a lot of trades. Bryce Huff, Sky Moore, Brian Robinson, and Keon White. They just didn't make one approaching this deadline, even though it seemed that they were very, very interested. And sometimes the stars do not align. And obviously, they did not align for the 49ers this time. See what else Mike has to say. John Lynch is going to speak on Wednesday, I believe. No, Thursday morning, KMBR. We'll get John Lynch. Tomorrow's going to be Kyle Shanahan in the facility. John Lynch on Thursday, KMBR. Mike says, how long do the 49ers bet on pillars like Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey long term? Well, I think that the 49ers, again, I'm going to go back to the 3-year window. I think this is year 1, 2025. Year 2 is 2026. Year 3 is 2027. I think that they're betting on those guys through 2027. Now, those guys are obviously going to be waning by 2027, but the hope is that you get the youth to rise into more prominent roles by then, so you're not as reliant on Christian McCaffrey and Trent Williams in 2027 as you are right now, right? So it's a passing of the torch that's happening. This year was the first major ceremonial passing of the torch because you went B-listers out, youngsters in. That was the overhaul of the offseason for the 49ers. I think that when you project forward, then 2026, the hope is that, I could go up and down this roster. I think the hope would be that guys like Jordan Watkins are emerging into a more prominent role for San Francisco. On the defensive side, Alfred Collins. Unfortunately, Michael Williams just got hurt. You'd hope that CJ West is knocking down the door of more playing time. You'd hope that Nick Martin is knocking on the door of actual playing time. You'd hope that Marquise Siegel is back in the rotation by 2026. You hope that this rookie class plays out of the rookie blues and is carrying enough weight to start taking some of the pressure off of the A-list pillars, who still will be counted on, but will no longer be the sole players that the 49ers are relying on just to bring along younger players. That's how a transition works in the NFL. Whether or not you nail the landing is a different story. I don't think there's anybody the 49ers could have picked up today that would have made the dynamics of that transition all too different. I do think they could have helped bridge the gap here in 2025 for a defense that has slipped for San Francisco, a defense that has slipped to number 25 in the league ever since Fred Warner went down in week 6. That is the graph right here. I mean, this is where the 49ers have to move further to the right and somehow stay afloat defensively, but it has been trending in the wrong direction. And the only trade that they made within a week or so of the deadline is Keon White coming over from the New England Patriots. Mike asks, what are the expectations the rest of the season? Well, San Francisco right now is at a point where they're not favored against the Rams. They regardless of what happened today, they were not going to be favored against the Rams. Look at the Rams. They're up here. That wasn't going to be the 49ers. We're waiting on Brock Purdy right now. We're waiting on Ricky Pearsall right now. We're waiting on Brandon Ayuk news right now. The offense, as George Kittle said after the win against the New York Giants, the offense has the potential to truly be great this year. And we've already seen some seedlings of that. They just have to get to some level of consistent health, and they have to get their quarterback one in there. Even if he's not at fully 100%, he can't have any aggravations of the turf toe. But if he's playing to 80 to 90%, then the 49ers will have an opportunity to truly make this offense hum because they need mobility at the quarterback position. So if the offense could be really good for San Francisco, then the defense, again, just needs to stay afloat. I thought that they might need another move, and they probably still do need another move. That's my opinion, though. If I was the GM, I would have rewarded the locker room with one more move, even if I overpaid. Obviously, John Lynch didn't do that. What will it take, though? And is it possible? Can Robert Saleh conjure enough magic to keep this defensive logo from falling further south? Because if you can keep it in this area and you can move the offense to here, you could be just to the right of the Eagles. Well, all of a sudden you're in that second tier and anything is possible in this league. This because the special teams for the 49ers, again, this is the number 3 special teams unit in all football by EPA ever since Jake Moody was cut, since they moved to Mr. Eddie Pinheiro. So special teams, I mean, that could be the great differentiator for the Seattle Seahawks so far. It has been. They're a tier 2 team, but they're number 1 DVOA because their special teams is number 1 in the league. The Rams, they'd be the best team in the league if their special teams was good, but it's not. maybe that comes into play on Sunday when the 49ers play the Rams. I think that, that would be one of the great ironies that we've ever seen if San Francisco is able to beat the Rams with special teams because of what has transpired in recent years. But Brant Boyer's crew has done a really good job. So if the 49ers can get two phases of the game buttoned down, and offense and special teams seem to be on track for that to happen, more dominoes still need to fall, but that seems good. Then it's all up to this defense, which they did not augment any further today at the trade deadline. It's all up to this defense to stay average. They haven't been average ever since Fred Warner went down. They need to raise the profile of this defense just a little bit. Whatever smoke and mirrors they use, whatever Bryce Huff can give this defense, if it could stay near this dividing line and the offense can get better and the special teams gives the 49ers a boost, they can continue what I think has turned into a Cinderella run. But they did not give themselves any sort of boost today. They gave themselves a boost last week with Keon White, with Cleveland Farrell. Nothing further today. I understand if 49ers fans are disappointed because we do know that they had aggressively been working the phones, but sometimes you don't reach a deal. And I don't know if it was because the Jets had traded Quinnen Williams to the Cowboys and were no longer willing to budge on Jermaine Johnson, or if the Dolphins were asking too much for Bradley Chubb, or if I do know that the Bengals wanted a 1 for Trey Hendrickson. I know that the 49ers were interested in making a move, but they could not consummate one. So this is the reality that they have to deal with right now. One of the things for San Francisco is the Rams are coming to town now, and the 49ers are 6-3. And they're 3.5-point underdogs. They've already beaten the Rams with less than they're going to have this week. That's where all the focus now needs to move. If there are any cuts, if the Dolphins say we don't want to pay Bradley Chubb anymore for the rest of this year and he is released, well, then at that point, the 49ers might try to pounce, although being lower in the waiver order probably will not be all too beneficial for San Francisco. But expectations do not change post-trade deadline for the 49ers. I think that we're looking at a 6-3 team right now. I think if they would have added a piece like a Jermaine Johnson, I would have been more optimistic about potential 49ers upsets against the Rams or the Seattle Seahawks. That's going to be harder. They're going to have to play nearly perfect offense to beat those teams and probably get some special teams breaks. But they still would have been, even with any of these potential additions, that the 49ers still would have been underdogs in either of those two games. They were still going to have to be an offense-forward football team for some of those games. They're still going to be favored in all but 3 of their games moving forward. The Rams, the Colts, and the Seahawks will be favorites over the underdog 49ers. But everything else, especially if they can get Brock Purdy back and Ricky Pearsall and develop some offensive explosiveness, everything else for San Francisco, they should probably be favored. So 10 or 11 wins is still possible. The main issue is that the Rams and the Seahawks are both top 3 DVOA teams, and they are in the 49ers division. Mike says, at least the 49ers have Eddie Pinheiro. Yes, Eddie Pinheiro, maybe the best kicker in the league with San Francisco. All right, trade deadline inactivity. That's behind the 49ers trade deadline silence. They decide to hold on to the draft picks. They did make 4 trades this year. You can't forget that. You have to look at the big picture. And the trades themselves, I opened the show with this, right here. Huff, Moore, Robinson, Keon White. Nothing ahead of the deadline, though. I'm sure we'll be filled in on some more of the story as we move forward. I will say that last week, with the additions of Farrell and the additions of Keon White, the 49ers pass rush, which is needed the most on this team, did get a lot better. And I guess all eyes now on Mr. Bryce Huff. He should be back against the Rams, and perhaps Bryce Huff is going to be tipping point for the 49ers defense the way that he was against the Falcons. That's what the 49ers are reliant on as they march forward through this 3-year window. They wanted to keep their draft picks unless they found a really, really good deal that could help them in 2026, because that 2026 draft, they're projected to have 7 or 8 picks at this point. That is going to be a opportunity for the 49ers to infuse one last finishing touch of youth ahead of the season. That should probably be the biggest window to win remaining with the current A-list core that includes Christian McCaffrey, Trent Williams, and all those guys. So it is a long-term strategy for the 49ers on a day that I know was disappointing to many of their fans. But they're 6-3 moving to this game against Los Angeles. And, well, they've got some juice now, at least along the defensive line following last week's moves. We'll see how it does against Matthew Stafford and company on Sunday.